She started running when she was 29, not because she liked it, but because everyone at the office was doing it. She bought expensive shoes and a watch that tracked her heart rate, and she ran every morning before work, even when it was still dark, even when it rained. She never enjoyed it, but she liked the way it made her feel afterward, clean, virtuous, like she'd earned the right to exist that day. There was a stretch of sidewalk near her apartment, about half a mile long, lined with oak trees older than the neighborhood. In spring, they'd drop small white flowers that stuck to the bottom of her shoes. She'd notice them later, dried and brown, pressed into her carpet. She never stopped to look at the trees themselves. She was always watching the numbers on her watch, making sure she was hitting her pace. Her apartment was small, a one-bedroom on the third floor of a building that always smelled faintly of someone else's cooking. There was a photograph stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. In it, she's maybe 7 years old, sitting on her grandfather's shoulders at the beach, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. She'd walk past that photo every morning and never really see it. Work was a tech company downtown, the kind with an open floor plan and a coffee bar and beanbag chairs no one ever sat in. She was good at her job. She knew how to make herself indispensable, always the first to volunteer, always available, always saying yes, even when yes meant staying until 8 or 9 at night. Her manager called her reliable. Her coworkers called her intense. She thought both were compliments. She had friends, or something like friends, people she'd get drinks with on Thursday nights. But the conversations always felt like performances, everyone trying to prove they were doing well. She'd laugh at the right moments and share the acceptable amount of vulnerability, enough to seem real, not enough to make anyone uncomfortable. And then she'd go home and feel more alone than if she'd spent the evening by herself. There was a man she dated for 8 months. He worked in finance, ran marathons, talked a lot about optimization. They were good on paper. Same ambitions, same routines, same vague sense that life was a problem to be solved through discipline. They'd meet for dinner at restaurants neither of them had chosen, scroll through their phones while waiting for food, have sex with the kind of efficiency that suggested they were both checking it off a list. He broke up with her in January in the parking lot of a Whole Foods. He said he didn't think they were growing together. She nodded and said she understood, and the strange thing was she did. She felt relief more than anything else, relief that she didn't have to try anymore, didn't have to maintain the performance of being someone's partner. Her mother called every Sunday at 10 in the morning. The conversations followed the same pattern. Her mother would ask how she was. She'd say fine. Her mother would talk about the weather or the neighbors, and after exactly 12 minutes, one of them would say they should probably go. Her mother never asked the real questions, and she never offered real answers. It was easier that way. One Sunday, her mother mentioned that her high school friend Sarah had just had a baby. Her mother said it like it was evidence of something, like she was waiting for a reaction. She said that was nice and changed the subject. But later, lying in bed, she thought about Sarah, tried to imagine wanting something like that for herself. Couldn't. She got promoted in March, more responsibility, more money, a title that sounded impressive. Her parents were proud, her friends were congratulatory. She posted about it on social media and got 143 likes. And that night, alone in her apartment, she felt nothing, just a kind of blankness, like she'd reached the top of a staircase and found another staircase waiting. She started working longer hours, not because she had to, but because she didn't know what else to do. The apartment felt too quiet in the evenings. At work, at least, there were tasks, things that needed doing. She could fill the hours with busyness and call it purpose. Her body started doing strange things, headaches that lasted for days, a tightness in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She'd wake up at 3 a.m, heart racing for no reason she could name. She went to a doctor who ordered tests and found nothing wrong. He suggested it might be stress. She nodded and left and didn't change anything. There was a park near her office where people went to eat lunch. She'd see them sometimes, people sitting on benches, just sitting, doing nothing. She couldn't understand it, how they could just be still like that. Didn't they have emails to answer? Weren't they worried about falling behind? One afternoon in May, she was walking past the park when she saw a little girl, maybe 4 years old, crouched down on the sidewalk, completely absorbed in watching an ant carry a crumb. The girl's mother stood nearby, scrolling through her phone, occasionally saying they needed to go. But the girl didn't move. She was entirely present in that moment, fascinated by something so small the rest of the world had learned to ignore. She stopped walking, stood there watching this child watch the ant, and for reasons she couldn't explain, her throat tightened. She felt something crack open inside her just slightly, and then she kept walking because she had a meeting in 10 minutes. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about the girl and the ant, thinking about how long it had been since she'd stopped to look at anything, really look, not as a means to an end, but just to see it. She thought about her mornings running past the oak trees, the thousands of times she'd passed them without once noticing the way the light came through the branches, or the fact that they'd been standing there long before she arrived and would be standing there long after she left. She thought about the photograph on her refrigerator. Her grandfather had died when she was 12. She could barely remember his voice now, couldn't remember what they'd been laughing about in that photo. All she had left was the image, and she'd stopped seeing it years ago. She thought about her life as if from a distance, and what she saw was a person in constant motion, always moving towards something, never arriving. A person who had optimized and scheduled and achieved her way into a kind of hollow existence that looked good from the outside and felt like nothing from the inside. The running, the work, the carefully curated social media presence, the relationships that never went deep enough to hurt, it was all the same thing, different forms of the same avoidance. She'd been so busy building a life that she'd forgotten to live it. The next morning she went for her run, same route, same pace. But this time, about halfway through, she stopped. Just stopped right there beneath the oak trees. Her watch buzzed, confused. She ignored it, looked up at the branches, at the way they formed a canopy overhead. The flowers were gone now, replaced by new green leaves that moved slightly in the wind. She stood there for 5 minutes, maybe 10, just looking. She started noticing other things after that. The way the light in her apartment changed throughout the day, the sound of her neighbor's piano, which she'd been hearing for 2 years without ever really listening to. The fact that the barista at the coffee shop had a gap between his front teeth and always drew a little smiley face on her cup. But noticing didn't change anything. She still went to work, still said yes to everything, still ran every morning, still checked her email at night, still maintained the machinery of the life she'd built, because she didn't know how to do it differently. The noticing just made it harder, made her aware of the gap between what she was doing and what she was feeling. She started having dreams about being late. She'd be running through airports, through unfamiliar cities, always trying to get somewhere, always missing the plane or the train or the appointment. She'd wake up exhausted, like she'd been running all night. Her best friend got engaged in July. They went out to celebrate at a wine bar that was too loud for real conversation. Everyone kept saying how happy they were, how perfect it all was. And all she could think about was how her friend had found someone she wanted to build a life with, and she couldn't even imagine what that would feel like. On the drive home, alone, she cried for the first time in months. Not because she was sad about the engagement, but because she realized she'd spent so long protecting herself from disappointment that she'd also protected herself from everything else, from connection, from vulnerability, from the possibility of being seen. She was 34 years old. She had a good job, a nice apartment, a body that worked, a life that looked like success, but she could not remember the last time she'd felt genuine joy, the last time she'd laughed without performing laughter, the last time she'd wanted something just because she wanted it, not because it fit into the plan. One Saturday in September, she didn't go for her run. She woke up, put on her shoes, stood by the door, and then took them off again. Sat on her couch instead, did nothing, just sat there, feeling the wrongness of it, the guilt, the sense that she was wasting time. She sat there for an hour, fighting the urge to get up, to be productive, to justify her existence through motion. And in that hour of sitting, doing nothing, being no one, she had a thought that terrified her. What if this is it? What if there is no arrival? What if the life she'd been preparing for was never coming? What if this was the life right here, right now, and she'd been missing it the entire time? She picked up her phone, scrolled through her photos, years of carefully composed images, meals at restaurants, sunsets from trips she barely remembered, group photos where everyone was smiling the same smile, evidence of a life being lived. But she couldn't find herself in any of them. There was one photo, though, from 3 years ago. She was at her cousin's wedding, standing off to the side, and someone had caught her in a moment when she didn't know she was being photographed. She was watching the bride dance with her father, and her face was unguarded, sad, maybe, or wistful, or just honest. She looked at that photo for a long time, tried to remember what she'd been feeling, couldn't. Her grandfather used to tell her a story when she was little. She'd forgotten it until one night when it came back to her suddenly. He said that when he was young, he'd wanted to be a painter, that he'd spent every free moment drawing, imagining a life where he could make art. But then he'd gotten married, had kids, needed a steady job, so he'd put away the paints, the dreams, the version of himself that wanted something different. And he'd told himself he'd get back to it later, when things settled down, when he retired. He never did. He died at 71, and in the back of his closet, they'd found an old box of art supplies, dried out and unused for 40 years. She thought about that box of paints a lot after that, thought about all the things people put away, meaning to return to them, never quite finding the time. On a Thursday in December, she missed a deadline, not because she forgot, but because she just didn't do it. She sat at her desk staring at the screen and couldn't make herself care. Her manager sent her a message asking if everything was okay. She said yes, but it wasn't. That night, she walked home instead of taking the train. It was cold, starting to snow, and it took her an hour. Her feet hurt, but she kept walking. Through neighborhoods she'd never seen before, past windows where she could glimpse other people's lives. Someone cooking dinner, a family watching television, a man standing alone in a kitchen. When she finally got home, her phone was full of messages, people wondering where she was. She looked at the messages and felt nothing, turned off her phone, sat in the dark of her apartment, still wearing her coat, and let the silence settle around her. She didn't know what she wanted. That was the thing. She knew what she didn't want, the running, the performing, the constant effort to be enough. But she had no idea what would replace it, who she was when she wasn't trying to be someone. The snow kept falling. She watched it through the window, accumulating on the fire escape, turning the city quiet. And she thought about the little girl watching the ant, the complete absorption in a single moment, the way everything else had fallen away. She wondered if she'd ever felt that, if there was ever a time when she'd been fully present, not running from or toward anything, just existing. And if there had been, when she'd lost it. She couldn't pinpoint it. It wasn't one thing. It was 1,000 small choices. 1,000 times she'd chosen safety over truth, achievement over presence, the appearance of a life well lived over the messy reality of actually living. And now here she was, 34, alone in an apartment that had never felt like home, successful by every metric that was supposed to matter, empty in every way that actually did. She kept thinking about her grandfather, about the paints in the closet, about all the people who spend their lives waiting for permission to want what they want, to be who they are. Permission that never comes because no one else can give it to you. She was still waiting, still running, still trying to earn the right to her own life through achievement and discipline and the approval of people she didn't even like. And one day, maybe soon, maybe years from now, she'd be old. Looking back at this moment, this apartment, this version of herself. And she'd wonder why she didn't stop running, why she didn't put down all the things she was carrying. But she already knew the answer, because stopping was more terrifying than running.